What's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 80 of the Freedom to Flourish podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about subclinical hypothyroid. We did a functional hypothyroid, and these things are very similar. But really, our goal is to help people identify when you have a thyroid pattern that no mainstream medical provider or a lot of functional docs won't even be able to identify. So this episode is really going to be geared towards those people who you just have chronic fatigue, chronic issues where you feel like it is a thyroid issue, maybe difficulty losing weight, maybe chronic stress, anxiety, things along that line, just generalized fatigue and other symptoms of thyroid problems. So our goal with this episode isn't to get too hardcore nitty gritty on what's going on, or I guess the underlying biochemistry of things, but more so, what practical steps can you take to go to, say, your primary care and say, hey, let's order this thyroid panel. Let's use the tools provided in this podcast to identify what the breakdown is and what supplements we need to take. And then from there, what practical steps moving forward other than supplements can you do just from home to mitigate things like cortisol, estrogens, insulin, inflammation, all of these things, as well as boosting liver detoxification, all sorts of other stuff that is 100% going to be tied into your subclinical hypothyroid issue. So this is all meant to be practical. We're going to walk you through, hey, you should order this. Maybe you can order this. And this is going to give you a framework of information to base your step-by-step process off of. So hopefully you guys will enjoy it. Hopefully you can take more out of it as far as it goes for less, I would say, just underlying learning of what's going on with underlying causes of conditions, and more so steps that you can take today to fix your problem. So hopefully it's going to be a great episode. Dr. Joel, how are you doing this wonderful day?
Doing well, Dr. Tim. So glad to be here. And let's jump into things. Awesome intro for us. So yeah, when most people are coming in with thyroid issues, or when people are talking about thyroid issues in general, you hit some of the main signs and symptoms there as far as, dealing with fatigue, weight gain issues, and a number of other things to kind of finish that list. Most people are often dealing with hair thinning or hair loss, as well as dry skin, constipation, and in general, just a number of different gut issues. So the big three: the weight loss or weight gain issue, the the fatigue, and then the hair. And I think the fourth would probably be brain fog. That's also a pretty big one as well. So as far as thyroid stuff goes, let's kind of jump into labs, right? So we're going to talk about labs for a second. We're going to talk about if you suspect you have different thyroid issues, what is the complete thyroid panel that you want to run that your mainstream doctor is probably not running. And so we're going to talk about that for a second. We'll talk about some of the different examples of like dysfunctional patterns, and of course the different ranges that you want to use when you're looking at these labs, so that you can kind of, again, go out and potentially run these labs yourself if you'd like to, or ask your doctor to run these labs, and then you can analyze them to some extent. And then we'll get into the main thyroid stressors, and then we'll talk about, hey, how do you start fixing these things, and what are some practical steps you can take, whether it's regarding nutrition, whether it's regarding supplements, whether it's regarding lifestyle stuff. We're going to get into all that. All right, Dr. Tim, let's jump into labs. So most of the time, if you go to your doctor, your endocrinologist, your primary doctor, whoever it is, and you ask for a thyroid panel or for them to check your thyroid, in my experience, they're usually going to run TSH and maybe T4, either T4 total or T4 free. And most of the time it's just TSH, which is ridiculous. But every once in a while they'll throw in a little T4 as well. But Dr. Tim, there are so many other labs that we need to be checking. Let's kind of run through those together. Are those the labs you're seeing other doctors run as well? And then what does the full panel really look like?
Well, first thing to answer your question, yes. Usually it's just TSH. And like you said, a lot of times it's just total T4, which just to, I guess, provide a little bit of insight as to what these things are. So before we really get into like what all these things mean and what you should run, the complete thyroid panel that, well, I guess maybe we'll get into what you should run and then what they mean. So the full thyroid panel that we would argue that you should be running contains TSH, your T3 and T4, the total amounts of each one, the free versions of each one, so free T4, free T3, reverse T3, and then your thyroid peroxidase antibodies and your thyroglobulin antibodies. Now to explain what those mean, because that sounds like a bunch of gibberish, I'm sure, to our listeners. So if you have had any sort of thyroid labs run, you will undoubtedly have TSH. That is thyroid stimulating hormone. So that is a hormone secreted by your pituitary gland that tells the thyroid, hey, let's make thyroid hormone. So at least to give the, I guess, medical, allopathic side some credit, if their solution to fixing a thyroid issue is give you medication or take your thyroid out, TSH is sufficient to identify how to increase or decrease medication, or to tell you if you have Graves' disease and let's just take your thyroid out. So if TSH is produced as a result of low hormone, what will happen is TSH production will increase. So think of it this way. If your brain perceives there's low thyroid hormone in circulation, it's going to say, maybe we should produce more hormone, and that's where TSH goes up. So in autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto's, where your immune system attacks your thyroid and you can't produce hormone, TSH goes high. In Graves' disease, where your immune system upregulates your thyroid and causes you to produce a ton of hormone, TSH goes down to basically zero. The brain goes, hey, we've got way too much of this stuff. Let's not produce more. And so it's just a factor of, how much hormone do you have? And if you do the proper dose of a medication, it will normalize. And so that's why I really don't think that they order anything more than that, because it really doesn't matter as far as they're concerned. It's wasted money. And to give them credit, I think the medical side wastes a lot of money as is. And so to save money on labs where it's not going to change how they treat, I guess I can respect that. But that's to say, if you're looking for medication to fix, in quotes, fix your problem. But our listeners typically aren't looking to do that. They're looking to solve things and truly fix your problem without having to take medications. So with that being said, we need to look at the full picture of things. So TSH is not the only marker that you need to run. You need to look at the amount of hormone, as well as different things that can involve inflammation, stress, and kind of shunt resources to other places and basically produce inactive forms of your hormone or cause your immune system to kick in and start killing things off. So that's where we need to look at T4 total, T3 total, and then your free versions of the T3 and T4. So anyway, if you're wanting to assess what's going on, those are the markers that you should run. And then from there, Dr. Joel, what do you say you start us off with explaining the difference between T3, T4, the free versions, and then maybe we can, get into what reverse T3 is and how all of those things in our second half of the list are really involved with stress and inflammation.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So your thyroid is going to make 90 out of all the hormones your thyroid makes. It's going to be 97% T4, which is considered more the inactive thyroid hormone. T4, the other 3% being T3, but T4 has to go to your liver and your gut health, as well as some other things like kidneys and some other tissues, but the main ones being your liver and your gut health, to get activated into T3. And so this, I'm giving a little foreshadowing here, because when we talk about how we fix thyroid issues, a lot of times we have to talk about having really good liver health and gut health, because if your thyroid organ in your neck is functioning well, but your liver and your gut health is not, you will still have thyroid issues. And so we talk about thyroid health being, yes, the thyroid organ, but it's really more the thyroid system, which is the thyroid, liver, and gut health. And so we'll get into that a little bit more. But your thyroid makes 97% T4, gets converted through the liver and gut health mainly into T3, and that's the active form. There are a number of different factors that will suppress this activation. These are the stressors we're going to get into later, things like cortisol issues, high insulin, high estrogen, inflammation, infections, things like that. And the same things that suppress T4 turning into T3 is what's going to turn T4 into what's called reverse T3. And the way that I kind of explain this, I'm curious if you have any other thoughts, Dr. Tim. The way I kind of explain this is that reverse T3 is kind of this sidelined thyroid hormone that's just there if the body needs it later. But the problem is, if you have a lot of these different factors that cause stress to the thyroid, like the inflammation and cortisol and so forth, then it's going to suppress the T3, T4 activation into T3, and then it's going to build up more reverse T3, which is not your active T3 hormone. So that can basically result in you having a slower metabolism and just overall lower thyroid. There's T3 and T4 total, which is the overall amount of hormone that you have of those. And then there's what we call the free hormones. If you've ever had any other labs ran, a lot of times when they run testosterone, for example, they'll run the total testosterone and then the free testosterone. And the difference between these is that your hormones are often carried throughout your body, throughout your system, attached to different proteins. And the hormones that are traveling that are not attached to protein carriers, those are considered free hormones. And those free hormones generally tend to be more readily used by the body and that kind of thing. And so you really want to look at both of those to see, okay, number one, just how much is the total in general, but then how much of those is healthy and free and ready to be immediately used and so forth. The last two markers we have is the thyroid peroxidase antibodies and the thyroglobulin antibodies. These antibodies are really immune system cells that are attacking your thyroid peroxidase enzyme in your thyroid, or the thyroglobulin, which is the protein carriers that carry your hormones throughout the body. So the antibodies against those two, if those are present, that we call that Hashimoto's, an autoimmune condition where your immune system's attacking your thyroid. So in general, you want to check those and at least the first time you do a full panel to make sure you don't have Hashimoto's. So Dr. Tim, anything to add to that, or anything that you might explain slightly differently between any of those things? And if not, let's talk about a few different very common dysfunctional patterns that we see in these labs that people can look for.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is understanding that things that will drive reverse T3 to go up and the things that will drive your immune system to produce antibodies are basically the same things. Yeah. So anytime that your thyroid starts to fall apart and you'll get, say, like a functional or subclinical hypothyroid, or if you're ending up with or too much reverse T3 or an autoimmune condition where you're attacking your thyroid, all of those things are going to end up being the same. And that's where when we get into the main thyroid stressors, we're going to highlight all those things, and it's going to be practical steps moving forward to start reversing this process. But for, I guess, the main focus of this episode, the subclinical hypothyroid, say you go to your doc and they say, your TSH is fine, so therefore you don't have a thyroid issue. Your T4 is fine, therefore you don't have a thyroid issue. What are some forms of a subclinical hypothyroid that we can help our patients or our listeners identify through these markers? So before we get into this, we need to talk about what are typical lab ranges for TSH and what is a good functional range for TSH. And by functional range, we mean basically our narrowed ranges where we're looking for optimal function as opposed to just full-blown pathology. So ideally with TSH, you should be looking at it between 1.8 and 3. Your medical labs, or even if you just go to a draw center, it's going to say 0.45 to 4.5. And I mean, you guys can do the math on it. It is basically like triple the range, if not more. I think it's about triple. Yeah, it's about triple. But it's a huge wide range. The TSH is, quote, normal. But if you're like, if you're at 0.5 and somebody's at 4.2 and you're on the same level, I would argue that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. There's clearly some underlying differences between you and that other person. But with a typical functional hypothyroid, remember, TSH is secreted by the pituitary in the brain based off of how much hormone you have in circulation or what sort of storm your body is weathering. So I think that's very important to understand. If you are going through inflammation, through infections, allergies, toxic exposures, you name it, all kinds of stuff, or you're going through significant metabolic issues due to stress, due to blood sugar issues, too much insulin, things like that, your brain's going to go, maybe we should take our foot off the gas here. Maybe we should take some time to conserve resources because clearly we're either starving, sick, or significantly stressed. And we need to hold on to resources so we can live to fight another day. And when that's the case, TSH will go a little low. So it'll go below 1.8. And then from there, your T3, T4 total, and your T3 and T4 free will go slightly low. So the main ones that I tend to look at for whether or not this is a true functional hypothyroid is your free versions of T4 and T3. So your free T4, as far as I look at it, should be between 1 and 2, and your free T3 should be between 3 and 4. If those go slightly low, that's a good sign that you are not basically having enough metabolic output. So what your thyroid hormone does, your free T3 mainly, is it tells your cells, hey, let's produce more energy. It tells your mitochondria, let's make more ATP, for those who know what that means. It just allows us to produce more energy. And so oftentimes what I'll see is that free T4 is normal, but free T3 is a little low. And so, think about it like this. TSH must tell the thyroid, let's make T4, and then it'll go throughout the body and it'll get to some other location. Then it'll be converted to T3. And then from there, at the site where it's going to be used, it'll be converted to the free version. There's a lot of steps in that reaction. And so if you are from the start producing less hormone, every step in the process, you're going to get less and less that actually makes it through. And so if you were just looking at free T4 and you have TSH and that's all your primary care ordered, you could have normal T4 and a low end of normal or a minorly functionally low TSH. And then your T3 might be low or your free T3 might be low, but you can't see that. And so seemingly on labs, you don't have a functional hypothyroid or a subclinical hypothyroid. And that's why they call it subclinical, because it seems normal, but really it's not especially normal. And so when that's the case, typically the main drivers are the things we're going to get into in a little bit: cortisol, estrogens, insulin, caffeine, inflammation, liver issues, gut health, all that stuff. That's honestly one of the most common patterns that I'll see, where people say, I really think my thyroid's a problem, but I go to my doc and they say, it's good. You don't need hormone. You don't need this. You're fine. It's got to be something else. Maybe you should just exercise and you'll feel better. Would that help? Sure. But I don't argue, or I don't think that that's the only thing that's going on, of course. So anyway, there's also conversion issues, but I think I've gone on long enough. Dr. Joel, would you add anything to that? And if not, let's get into kind of that conversion of T4 to T3 and things that are involved in that process and how that can be irritated as well.
Yeah, totally. No, that's all good. Yeah. So when it comes to that conversion of T4 to T3, like I mentioned earlier, the liver and the gut health are huge with that conversion. Now, there's two nutrients that are needed for that conversion in both those locations: selenium and zinc. And so we'll talk about those as nutrients later that can be really supportive for the thyroid. With selenium, just a little screenshot or screen peek there. I like to use Biotics SE-Zyme Forte, and then with zinc, I like to use zinc chelate from Standard Process. But we'll get into those a little bit more later. And so those two nutrients are key, but in general, if your liver is under a lot of stress, whether you have hormone issues or whether you are, most people, when we talk about the liver, they say, oh, I don't drink. Okay, well, alcohol can be a big stressor to the liver, but for most people, it's not. For most people, the stress to the liver is poor blood sugar handling because they don't get enough protein. They get too many carbs. The liver is the number one organ that's going to have to handle and process carbohydrates. And so any more carbs, any more sugars, that's always going to stress your liver to some extent. And the thing that supports your liver is protein. So most people don't get enough protein. Most people eat too many carbs. And with our U.S. diet, that's pretty common with things. And so that can always stress the liver. Hormone issues, I mentioned. And then just in general, just the junk that we put into our bodies through poor nutrition today: preservatives, artificial things, different seed oil, stuff like that. When it comes to the gut health, we've made so many different episodes about the gut health, but the biggest thing with the gut health goes back to different infections and bacterial, fungal imbalances, or even parasites. And with those things will always come different toxins that come off of that. And guess what has to detox that? The liver has to detox that. And so a lot of times the liver can be under stress because of the gut health, in which case both of those will contribute significantly to conversion issues. So what does that look like on labs? Getting back to that, your T4 will usually be normal or even high. And then T3 will be a little bit low because that T4 is not converting enough to T3. Again, emphasizing why you need to run the full panel, because if you don't, you're not going to see all these different patterns. If you run the panel and TSH looks fine and T4 looks good or even a little high, and then you look at T3 and it's low, well, you're having hair loss or fatigue or weight gain issues because your liver is under too much stress and or your gut is under too much stress and or you have a selenium or zinc deficiency. So that's kind of the main pattern there. One thing I'll add as well to kind of cap off our few examples, I'll add two things. One is if the thyroid peroxidase antibodies or thyroglobulin antibodies are high, then that indicates, hey, there's an autoimmune issue, which Hashimoto's is not a thyroid issue. It's an immune system issue. And so with autoimmune issues, like we've talked about in our autoimmune episodes, and we did an episode on Hashimoto's actually, we talk about, hey, you've got to figure out what the trigger is to the immune system, whether it's an infection or food sensitivity or whatever. You want to address that and then do different things to help your immune system rebalance itself and regulate itself. And if you do those things properly, you can reverse those things, which is really cool. And then the last thing I'll add to kind of our lab patterns is if you're looking at things and like the patterns are all off, like the TSH is, let's say the TSH, so let's say the T4 is good or even higher, but the TSH is also high, like those patterns typically don't go together. If you see weird patterns, that's usually a sign that, hey, there likely is some kind of an infection or inflammation or something kind of throwing things off. And so as always, Dr. Tim, when we look at labs, of course, we want to look at what are these markers looking like as far as the thyroid goes, but then also just considering the patient in total, like what else is going on? Does this patient complain of a lot of inflammation? Does this patient have a lot of hormone imbalances? All of those things can impact the labs and throw them off in little odds and end ways. But we wanted to focus on kind of the main patterns we see here. So I don't want to keep on going on too much more there. So anything else to add to the labs, Dr. Tim?
Honestly, I think that's enough. There's other things that we could get into that could, give you indications for these other issues, but love to hear your take. But if you fix blood sugar and start supplying your body with good nutrients or good vitamins, minerals, things like that to detoxify hormones and caffeine and all that stuff, fix blood sugar and restore gut health, all this stuff gets better regardless of what the labs say. So it's not really as important, I would say. But let's get into the main thyroid stressors. So we've already touched on this. So our list that we have here is cortisol, estrogens, insulin, caffeine, inflammation, liver stress, gut health or infections, lack of movement. So just to mainly chunk these things together: cortisol, insulin, estrogen dominance, liver stress. I would argue that all three or all four of those things. Is that four? Yeah, that's four things. Mm-hmm. All four of those things go together. Okay. So we always talk about, blood sugar issues, dysglycemia diet, all that stuff. If you do not eat enough often enough, so you intermittent fast and have for years, blood sugar is going to dip low every single time you don't eat enough, and cortisol is going to be produced as a result. When that's the case, you're driving chronic stress. It's going to lead to adrenal dysfunction, adrenal fatigue, all that stuff. And that's a very early precursor to thyroid issues. So the best thing that you can possibly do is not let blood sugar go too low. And that's not to say eat numerous meals, like 6 meals a day, 6 small meals, because it just doesn't end up working out. I wish I had a spectacular reason for that, other than with the systems healthcare technique that we use to test patients in the office, the applied kinesiology. Anybody who I've ever seen that does the 6 small meals a day always shows up for significant indicators for blood sugar issues every single time. If you eat 3 good meals a day with plenty of protein and fat in each meal and not too many carbs, Blood sugar is great. We're meant to eat in the morning when we get up, end our fasting state when cortisol is high in the morning, go a couple hours with working or whatever, and then have our break, have our lunch, and then get back to work, and then have our dinner, and then from there have the rest of our night without, having blood sugar constantly moving around. We should have a nice bell curve of blood sugar that comes up, falls back down, doesn't go above or below the good lines and good ranges. So whenever we have too much cortisol that's produced, you're going to deplete your methyl donors. So methylated B9, B12, activated B6, as well as some other antioxidants involved with hormone detoxification. And when that's the case, you're going to get estrogen dominance, especially if you are a woman and you have your period every month and you have estrogens that ramp up all the time. If that is the case, you're just constantly depleting resources to detoxify all that stuff. And once you run out of those resources, that's where people say, ever since I turned 30, bam, all these problems kicked in. Or every single time, or ever since I turned 40, problems kicked in. Or after my second kid, problems kicked in. Well, it's because your body went through a huge hormonal shift over, either acutely or relatively acutely with pregnancy, or over time, hormones were way too high, liver was struggling, and then all of a sudden, bam, ran out of resources to detoxify it, and then all these issues happened. All of these problems are centered around depletion of resources due to unnecessary processes that we have going on in our body, unnecessary hormone production, unnecessarily need for breakdown because of poor lifestyle choices. Most health conditions in our country nowadays are centered around poor metabolic health. Heart disease, diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, all that stuff centered around blood sugar. So anyway, if we are able to eat 3 meals a day, 5 hours apart, plenty of protein and fat at each meal, and then what we like to say is carbs to carb tolerance. If you're tired after you eat, you had too many carbs. Ideally, no processed sugars, things like that. If you follow that diet and you start taking things like methylated B9, so 5-MTHF, methylated B12, pyridoxal 5-phosphate, maybe some trimethylglycine, some magnesium, some zinc, you're going to replenish your resources to detoxify that stuff. But to add something else into this, caffeine also depletes methyl donors. And so it's going to deplete all those supplements or vitamins that I just mentioned. And in addition to that, caffeine is stimulatory to your nervous system and your adrenals. So if you are stimulating the adrenals, that means more cortisol production. So caffeine causes you to need to break down caffeine, 1. 2, you're going to produce more cortisol and steal those resources from good hormone production. And beyond that, you have to detoxify the cortisol as well. So you're adding 3 things to your list of unnecessary drains on those good resources. So just don't do it. Ideally, no caffeine. Ideally, eating 3 really good meals a day, plenty of protein and fat, and taking those nutrients that I just mentioned, maybe some glutathione, maybe some NAC, maybe some artichoke extract with it. And those are going to hit all of your methylation nutrients and all 3 of your main hormone detox pathways. If you take all of those things and you manage blood sugar, I guarantee you your fatigue is going to get better. I guarantee you that the liver piece of this pie chart of your thyroid problem is going to get better. It's not a horribly difficult fix. Now, if there are other inflammatory things contributing, that's where patients end up in our office and we have to work through things and identify what's going on there. But as far as it goes for the solely metabolic side of things, fix your blood sugar, take those nutrients, and you're going to be good to go. Limit caffeine, you'll be good to go. It just takes that whole liver thing out of the equation. Now, other parts of it are things like inflammation, gut health, all that stuff. So Dr. Joel, please contribute anything that I may have missed when it comes to the metabolic stuff, cortisol, insulin, all those things. But I think if you don't have a whole lot to add, let's get into inflammation and tell us about the gut and what we can do there.
Yep, I love it. A couple things with cortisol, lab testing. People love lab testing. When it comes to cortisol, you can do a blood test. You can obviously, keeping in mind that cortisol is going to be usually highest in the morning, drop down a little bit by the afternoon, and then even more by the evening. You can do a blood test. I know a lot of doctors will recommend doing a saliva test for that. Dr. Tim, do you have a lab company you use with that?
I don't know it off the top of my head. It's
the
most popular one.
Yeah, there's a number of different companies that we've used in the past. To be honest, I don't run that a lot with patients because usually we jump into the muscle testing and figure out their cortisol issues that way. But in general, if people have higher stress, tension and their body just has a lot of sympathetic dominance, survival state symptoms, they usually have cortisol issues. Estrogen dominance, you can run a test called, you can do a Dutch test. It's a urine test. If you look up Dutch hormone testing, they check so many hormones. They check all of the hormones as far as I'm concerned. So that can be a really good comprehensive way to look at all the hormones. And like I said, it's a urine test, so it's pretty simple. For insulin, you can do a fasting insulin blood sugar test. Basically, that's just a blood test. They just draw your blood. It's usually about $10 or so, and check your fasting insulin level. Of course, you want to be fasting about 8 hours at least with no food, just water before doing that. When it comes to inflammation, there's usually about 2 different things that I mentioned with inflammation. So number one is having what we call a fatty acid imbalance. That's where you have too many high omega-6s, and which are inflammatory, and then the omega-3s, which are anti-inflammatory, are too low. This usually is going to happen because of seed oils and trans fats in our diet today in America. What you want to do is you want to support your body with detoxing those things by basically increasing the omega-3s. So a fish oil high in EPA. The 2 brands I like are Nordic Naturals and Barleans, I believe is what it is, which is the liquid one. I don't use that one as much. We usually use the Nordic Naturals Pro EPA in the office. The other thing that can really help support balancing out these omega-6s, really reducing them down and helping your body detox, is magnesium, zinc, and B6. And so there's a number of different things that can help there. With magnesium, you have magnesium calm, magnesium citrate, magnesium glycinate. They can all be helpful. Most people I find test really well for magnesium calm. And when it comes to B6, I like B6 phosphate from Biotics. And zinc, again, I like standard process zinc chelate. The other source of inflammation a lot of times is going to come from something called NF-kappa B. NF-kappa B comes from your immune system. This is what drives arthritis. 2 things that really help with that inflammation: curcumin, turmeric curcumin, and something called resveratrol, which comes from the herb called Japanese knotweed. So if you take curcumin and Japanese knotweed, you're going to hit both things there. One of the biggest things I see as stressors to the thyroid is the gut health. Dr. Tim mentioned this, and really with the gut health, like I mentioned earlier, infections are the biggest thing. Infections are the biggest thing, as well as, I would argue, food sensitivities. Usually gluten and dairy are kind of the main ones, and as well as just inflammation in the gut from processed foods, sugar, things like that. So when it comes to the thyroid health, when it comes to the liver and the gut health, the biggest thing you can do is really get your nutrition really stinking good. What that's going to look like, Dr. Tim mentioned, you should eat 3 meals a day, no snacking in between, focus on enough protein and fats. With most people needing to eat, anywhere from 25 grams of protein to 30 or 35 grams of protein per meal. That comes to 75 to 100 and some grams of protein. 75 to 100 and some grams of protein per day for women. Men usually need a little bit more, at least 100 grams of protein per day with things there. Fats are healthy and they do not make you fat. So grass-fed butter, we should be eating 2 tablespoons a day, every day for adults. For kids, maybe half that. Olive oil is awesome. Avocados are awesome. There's a lot of good healthy fats there. Eggs, of course, are huge. So getting some of that in every day is key. And like Dr. Tim mentioned, if you are feeling hungry within 2 to 3 hours after you've eaten, you didn't eat enough protein and fats the meal before. So you want to look back and realize, hey, I didn't eat enough. I need to get more in this next meal. But when it comes to gut health, the nutrition is key. Eating that way is going to help balance cortisol and blood sugar and all that stuff. But then also eating only whole foods. One of the problems today is a lot of our food is processed and there's so much junk added to them. The food has been changed and manipulated, and there's genetically modified stuff in our food and all these things. We want to focus on getting pure food and pure ingredients. And the more that we veer away from that, the more junk our body's going to have to process. And that's going to put stress on our system. Outside of that, to go a little bit deeper, when we talk about infections, that's where we really jump into herbs. Now, with the gut health, you can have parasites, bacteria, fungus. We've done some different episodes on this, and so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but a lot of times herbs are the way to go to balance that out along with good nutrition. If you have amazing nutrition, if you have good movement, which is also on our list here for things that can really help thyroid and metabolism, getting 10,000 steps a day, 15,000 steps a day is amazing. You eat right, you sleep well, and you move well and move often. I promise you, your health is going to improve. Now, the challenge, Dr. Tim, I find with most people is their health has been so poor for so long that doing these things, they can do it for a month and they don't see a ton of progress. That's because you've been sick for so stinking long. If you do these things well, it might take 3, 4, 5, 6 months before you start really noticing huge progress, but your body is actually healing itself. It's not some medication or prescription that's just going to manipulate things temporarily. No, your body's actually healing itself. Now, if you take supplements, which we need to touch on this before we wrap up here, things like zinc chelate, S-enzyme, things like iodine. If you have Hashimoto's, you should not take iodine. If you don't have Hashimoto's, iodine is awesome. And the one that I like to recommend it's called Iosol, IOSOL. You can find this online. It's kind of a purple and red label. It's a liquid iodine, but that can be amazing for the thyroid as well. Zinc, selenium, iodine, enough protein. You get those things. Those are kind of the key things. And then a lot of the methylating nutrients Dr. Tim mentioned are awesome. So if you eat right, you move well and move often, get great sleep, manage stress, and you take these key supplements, you will get better. Your body will start healing itself. What gets a little bit tricky is if there's a lot of other factors like chronic gut issues, chronic estrogen dominance issues. That's where things can be a little bit more tricky. There's other supplements you would add in to help that process, but the foundation remains the same. Great nutrition, good movement, and moving often, and then good sleep and managing stress. Dr. Tim, I know we're out of time here. We've got to wrap up. Any last things that we might mention to our listeners for things that they can do to support their thyroid here naturally? And if not, or if there's a lot more, we might have to do a part 2 here. We'll see.
Nothing too crazy. I guess my quick little 2-minute spiel on if you are trying to solve your thyroid problem from home. One, like we said, fix blood sugar. Heavily encourage you to listen to our podcasts on stress, anxiety, all that stuff, because we highlight in great detail how to fix blood sugar with that. That'll help with eliminating the excess production of hormones to regulate blood sugar. Now, for a good combo of supplements to eliminate hormones, support hormone detox, support the liver, all that stuff, my awesome list that I would recommend. So starting with MethylGuard from Thorne. So that's got your B6, your B9, your B12, as well as trimethylglycine, which is great for methylation. That's going to hit all your significant B vitamins for the sake of hormone detox. And then in addition to that, maybe taking some glutathione and some artichoke extract. That's going to hit all of your hormone detox pathways. You're going to be good to go. In addition to that, eliminating caffeine. Super, super important. So there's a lab called Alletes, Allettess, maybe doing a food sensitivity test. So when we talk about inflammation, it could be beyond the gut. Maybe you have a food. And with the thyroid, there is something called molecular mimicry, where gluten or dairy or casein can actually make your immune system attack the thyroid even more, because those proteins look similar to thyroid hormone, or thyroglobulin, which is the protein that is added to iodine to make thyroid hormone. So maybe do a food sensitivity test, eliminate the foods that you're highly reactive to. But then from there, like you said, get moving. Maybe do some fish oil to clear inflammation. Get more organic grass-fed meats. Eat more fish. Eat less seed oils, less denatured or rancid fats at that point. And then exercise, get moving. Aerobic activity, lifting weights, all of those things are going to increase metabolism and help deal with insulin issues. If you do all those things in combination, you are going to feel better. There's no question about it. You are going to feel better unless you have some very significant underlying things that need to be addressed with that. If you do all those things, it's going to be good. So beyond that, I think that we're good to go to wrap it up. I think that's a good list of things that patients can start off with in addition to the stuff that you've already mentioned.
I like it. I like it. Awesome. Well, hey guys, thanks so much for tuning in. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Again, my name's Dr. Joel Miller. The practice here is called Freedom Health and Wellness here in the Flower Mound, Texas area. You can find me online at on Instagram. Our website is drjoelmiller.com. And then, like I said, you can find me on Instagram. If you guys have any questions, please reach out. We'll be happy to help or give any guidance or direction on things. And would love to help you out in any way possible. Dr. Tim, tell us about, tell people how they can find you.
Yeah, so I'm Dr. Tim Augustiniak down here in Bentonville, Arkansas at Flourish Functional Wellness Center. You can find me online at draugustiniak.com. That's draugustiniak.com. I have links to all of the socials on there, as well as all the contact info for the office. So if you guys want to reach out, give us suggestions for future episodes, or if you just have any questions or any comments, concerns, anything like that, just let us know. Beyond that, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you for listening to episode 80. It's kind of crazy that we've made it that far. And we'll just look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Thanks so much.